Today I have a very special treat. Here in the studio with me is my oldest daughter, Kaylynn, and she is my very first child, but also my very first guest here on the podcast. So, Kaylynn, welcome.
Hello. Good to be here.
So, I wanted to have a conversation about Christian education, parenting, and discipleship. But that's a big package right there, on which many volumes have been written.
Yes.
And so let's just start with your story. Tell us your story growing up in the Himelick household. What was that like?
So I grew up in Indianapolis. We moved to DeQuincy Street when I was 1, I believe.
Yeah, you're 1 year old.
Yeah, so a lot of my very early memories are from church there, and I went to school at a little Christian day school that was just around the corner my kindergarten year, and I remember the day that Mommy told me that I was going to get to be homeschooled. I don't remember the events surrounding it, but I remember walking into the kitchen and her saying, "Kaylynn, we decided." And I was so excited, and I ran and gave her a big hug. The next few years were spent doing a lot of traveling. We did traveling for the ministry and speaking. I remember learning a lot, but not necessarily a ton of educational structure. But I remember there being lots of wonderful experiences. I remember reading a lot. Danny and the Dinosaur.
Yes.
And the Firehouse Cat. I just found that book the other day.
Classics.
Growing up in the Himelick household has always been an adventure.
Yes.
From the beginning. I was born and 9/11 happened about 3 months later. We moved to Indianapolis about a year after I was born. So a lot of my early memories are experienced with lots of cultures and lots of different people in and out of our house. I remember lots of different faces and people that influenced me through that time. When I was about 9 years old, we moved from Indianapolis to a little tiny farm in the middle of nowhere with a lot of people that had a lot of different ideas. And I remember during that time asking lots of questions.
Yeah. So for some background, at that time we had a lot of interns coming to us from a number of different colleges, universities, primarily to study kind of sustainable agricultural methods. And so many of them are coming from a non-Christian background.
Or at least very
secularized.
Yes.
And so would believe in evolution, would believe in a lot of different things, and were pretty vocal about their beliefs. And so you're being exposed to these ideas, these people, and rubbing shoulders with them, picking green beans with them, pulling weeds with them, and they're sitting at our dinner table at night. So that's kind of the background.
And that would have been from the time I was really 9 until about 12. At that point when Esther was born and Mama started having seizures, that was the point where our family stopped traveling and stopped doing a lot of in-home hospitality.
Yeah.
We became a little bit of an island at that point. And I remember through that time, it was a hard time, and yet it was probably one of the best.
We drew closer, didn't we?
Yes. Our entire family became very, very tight-knit. And that was also the time that I started reading the most, I should say listening. I received my Kindle Fire when I was 14 years old and started downloading books, audiobooks, and just consuming lots of different classics. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jane Eyre, lots of Charles Dickens. All of those begin influencing me.
How did they influence you specifically?
I actually just thought about this recently because I went back and read Jane Eyre again. This is one of my favorite books, and realized that there are characteristics that I have emulated that I did not realize came from that story. The place that it shaped me the most was in what I saw as beautiful and what I saw as good.
Yeah.
I've since listened to lots of things about the books that I read and realized at the time this is what was happening to me. This is the shaping that was going on. But at the time I was just loving the stories and really enjoying like finding out what Captain Nemo's deal was. Yeah, so I wouldn't have said I was undergoing a transformational process.
Yeah.
But that is 100%
That's what was happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was probably, I continued listening to lots of books. I love children's literature, began loving that more and more. Wing Feather Saga and Andrew Peterson, his stuff. Stories became were a big part, had always kind of been a big part, but became
A larger part
of my educational experience.
Yeah. So my philosophy always has been, and you've heard me say this hundreds of times, Mark Twain's famous quote, "I never let my schooling get in the way of my education." Yes. And so I know that's the way that we kind of grew you early on, but how has that shaped you as you've continued forward? Obviously, a lot more of your academic experience has been shaped by your schooling.
Yeah.
But talk about how that fits together with where you're at now in your education process.
That's a really good question, a big question. I think the philosophy of understanding that our education does not have to be defined by just what we do in the classroom has allowed me to understand myself as a continual learner, that I'm never going to stop learning.
So talk to me a little bit about your philosophy of education.
That is a big term. Okay, philosophy of education. What is that? You can't ask me that.
Okay, so let me just ask you this. You have a dream for starting a school someday.
Yes, I do, actually.
So tell me about your school.
My school.
Because that will help me
is true.
see your philosophy of education.
What does it look like?
What would your school look like? If you had the ability to start a school and form it in the way you wanted to,
What would I want my kids
what would you
to
want them to experience?
I want them to experience stories. That's one big one. I want them to experience nature, life, serving, all of those things when it comes down to it. I want them to learn what is good, what is the good, the beautiful, and the true. And for me, that has been shaped in large part by stories, but also been shaped by my understanding of, backing up a little bit, I am very, very conscious of the fact that we live in a postmodern world, but also a world that has been radically shaped by modernism and the understanding that God is unnecessary for life. The people of Gen Z, their call, their cry is that there is something beyond what we can just see, feel, think, and hear. You had just asked me about my philosophy of education. What would I want my kids to look like? I want them to know what it means to be a Christian. Yeah. God has given us the responsibility of passing on our faith, and that faith includes so much more than just, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. It definitely includes that. The tenets of our faith are so incredibly foundational. And yet it needs to build all the way until we're learning about science rather than trying to figure out how exactly this animal evolved with the 100 question marks that go along with that. There's so much about the world that God has given us that can be discovered if we have some of those foundational things, if there aren't question marks in those foundational areas. Sure. So our ability to build on that and begin seeing the good, the beautiful, and the true throughout all of education, throughout all of the subjects of school, is something that I want to grow. I want to see happen.
Growing up in our family, I would love to say that I had this grand plan of education for you and your brother and sisters, but that wouldn't be the truth. A lot of what you've gotten, I would say, had to have been caught rather than taught, because I don't remember teaching it. And yet, like at 21, you have caught a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's incredible to talk to you, not just as a daughter, but as a peer, who has things to contribute to the conversation. What did we do right? How did we do this?
Everything. It's the reason I am the way I am. No, I do remember, so thinking about the whole idea of, I do remember you telling people, I don't ever remember you telling me this, but I remember you telling others that you were training us because one day, 1,000 years from now, we will primarily be your sister. We will primarily be your sisters and your brother, not your children. That stuck with me. That understanding that I don't even know 100% how that all affected me, but I remember that shaping me and helping me recognize that I am also a part of God's plan. That I am not just my father's daughter.
Yeah.
But that I can be the
daughter of the king.
Yes.
I think for a lot of parents, there's almost an idolatry that goes along with kids at sometimes. This sense in which we do everything for the children, and it's all justified because the children are so important. And yet the reality is that 1,000 years from now, whatever we do has to be for the king and kingdom.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there has to be a bigger picture that we're working for than just, we're going to raise these selfish little rugrats to be great big selfish people.
Yes.
Who become consumers and live out the, that we really do instill in them that there is a bigger picture than just your comfort, your personal life,
Yes. And the fact that so I think that gets lived out in a lot of different areas. One of the primary ones that I'm realizing more and more is the area of ministry or hospitality together. I think one of the ways that specifically our family, I don't know that I would say handled it. And I'm not 100% certain that it was or that it was an intentional choice. I think it was just not for the results that actually ended up coming in Indianapolis. And then also here, there was constantly someone that you and mommy were loving in a loving with an embrace. There's a difference between loving someone with your arm
at arm's length.
At arm's length, yes. There's a difference between loving someone at arm's length and loving them from your home, choosing to go out of your way and watching you do things for people that they ended up not appreciating at all. And then in the end, not having a bad attitude about it. That was one area that I remember multiple times making an impact on me and recognizing that we do things that we do for Jesus, whether people remember them or not. I remember I was probably 16 or 17 when I first realized everything that you gave up, that you and Mama gave up to come to the farm. And then that you guys gave up after Mama started having seizures. The realization that that the wisdom, the talent, the love that you guys poured out seems like it would have been in God's grand scheme, would have been best used in a big ministry somewhere where you could be a part of lots of people's lives and change the world. And I wrestled with this idea, recognizing that God had put you in the middle of Indiana on a farm where you were not ministering to very many people. As I was struggling with this, Jesus made it clear to my heart that it is not primarily our use to him that he is worried about. That understanding of his heart for us, that he's not primarily worried about the things we can do for him. He wants us to be his children.
Yeah.
That is not a job description. That was a thing that I think was one of the biggest.
And for us, ministry has always been a way of life, not a job
Yes.
description.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, wherever we're at and whatever we're doing, we're endeavoring to demonstrate the reconciliation, that message. But it doesn't necessarily look like, smell like sometimes what most people commonly refer to as ministry. And so getting to grow up here at Victory Acres, getting to spend time with the myriad of people who've come to us out of addictions, out of prison, out of homelessness, out of lots of different life circumstances, and walk the road with us has given you kind of an upfront picture of what ministry outside of the spotlight could be. So we started the Nehemiah Discipleship program here 3 years ago. This is we're going into our third full year, I guess. But we had the pilot program in September 2020 and geared up in 2021. Added more youth, and last year had 43 young people that participated, 21 children. It was an interesting time. But I was thinking a while back about how all that started. Coming home from Detroit, you and I riding in the front seat of the car, just dreaming, and the program just kind of began to unfold from that. Talk about that a little bit.
So what were we coming home from? We were coming home from some
event in Detroit.
It was
I forget even what
we had been working with. So during that weekend, we had passed out 2,000 flyers plus,
something like that. Yeah.
To an event. It was done with several youth in the area of Detroit. And I remember us talking about how it was such a good event. How could we make it better? What would make this a sustainable, long-lasting impact on a group of youth? What could we do that would create a culture of service, of putting scripture as foundational and fundamental? There were, I probably still have my paper somewhere of all of the things we lined out. And yeah, it was one of those things that as you were talking about it, there's so many dreams we've had and talked about, but this was one that needed to happen. It needed to happen this year. It needed to happen in the moment, not necessarily in the moment, but there is an unparalleled need in our society today for young people to stand up and take the call of ministry to the world.
Yeah.
So ministry meaning picking up the gospel, living it out in their lives on a daily basis in front of each and every person, and choosing to be radically committed to Christ and his kingdom in the world.
Amen.
The fact that our youth, that in society, specifically in the American context, our society has said that the teenage years are either to be spent trying to be controlled, trying to just make sure they don't get into trouble, or are spent wasted away doing things that when it comes right down to it, are meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much you can do with Call of Duty. There's not a...
Or Fortnite.
Or Fortnite. The drive that young people are gifted by God is not something that we should allow to be wasted. Do Hard Things is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it.
You should.
Wholeheartedly.
You should. Absolutely.
So that was kind of taking this energy, taking this power source that God has given to the church,
Mm-hmm.
Which is their youth, was originally the foundational idea of the Nehemiah Discipleship Program. Discipleship meaning following, a follower, or one who is imitating. There's this idea that we are to walk after Jesus, walk
Mm-hmm.
after him, and then have others walk after us,
Mm-hmm.
is something that has to happen in the everyday.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot be something that we need 4 years to prepare for before you can go do it.
Right.
Yeah, so the Nehemiah Discipleship Program is something that I'm super passionate about.
Yeah. Well, and I'm super excited about the way that God is using it, not only in other young people's lives,
Mm-hmm.
but in your lives.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about, what's an example of something from NDP that has personally impacted you?
Well, I have an example, but I'm not sure I should share.
Okay.
No. No.
Well, is there one you can share?
The Nehemiah Discipleship Program experience is an incredible, wonderful event. And I think that has become an event that that creates a culture
Mm-hmm.
that allows us to have people realize that there are so many people beyond me
Mm-hmm.
that want to follow Jesus. That has been a super influential part of the experience of the Nehemiah Discipleship Program.
Mm-hmm.
However, during the
Summer training.
Summer training program,
Mm-hmm.
there was an experience that I had the first year. We had just finished a session with Andrew Street. He had been talking about the abortion issue and what that means for the church, what we should be doing. I was so on fire in that moment. Very, very just like, I'm ready. Let's go. We're going to go and do things and help the people. And yeah, I was very ready. I was ready to give my life to that. And I remember I went to we had a time of prayer and reflection after the session. We were supposed to go and be by ourselves with God for a while. And so I went to we have a little cabin that has several books in it, our library. I went to the library cabin and started praying. And Jesus he just so gently came up next to me and said, I want you to just take the next right step. And I want you to be an agent of change in the mundane. At the time, I did not know what that looked like. I didn't know. I still don't 100% know what that looked like. But for me, that was a moment he gave me the picture of a mother. And the fact that her impact is not primarily in her wise words to masses of people, but she radically is able to shape one person.
Yeah.
Or 5 people. Yes. No. 6 people.
Depending on how large your family is.
There is power in just obeying God today.
Mm-hmm. And I think that following Jesus in the mundane and being willing to just in that moment do the next right thing really is where a lot of people get lost. I'm going to do great things for God someday in the future. And right now, what am I doing? Well, I'm vegged out here doing nothing. Well, we are close to 40 minutes right now.
Good.
So we are going to land this plane here.
How are we going to land it, Daddy? One step at a time.
So what I would like to know from you is we've talked about discipleship. We've talked about the Nehemiah Discipleship Program, education.
Mm-hmm.
So
all of it.
I want you to talk to the parents who are out there of children, young people today. How can they help to develop a Christian understanding, worldview, love for the truth in their children's lives? What are the things that affected you the most, and what do you think would make the most difference in the lives of other young people?
I'm going to start with a word. It's got a lot more components than what I'm going to give it, but this is the thing that affected me probably the most. Consistency. Seeing, and when I say consistency, I mean seeing a pattern of life that is not just the same across the board, that does not make them question things they should be able to know are true.
Like God is good.
God is good. If you believe that and live that in front of them, they will be able to see it eventually. Oftentimes that's going to come through pain, through experiences of pain.
Yeah.
So when you get the opportunity to experience pain with your children, that is an opportunity for you to live out truth in front of them. But that has to be done with a heart that is submitted. Yeah. Because otherwise it will turn into bitterness. So I think consistency is huge. I say this gently. I think it's... I want to use the word positivity, but I don't know that that's the word that best describes it. Just the idea of living in hope probably fits it more. That every situation has a good God standing at the beginning and the end, and that he walks with us through it. So even in the dark situations, there's always room to laugh. And then I really think that stories are a huge way of shaping our understanding of the world. I don't think it's an accident that Jesus used stories. And I think good stories, I think your kids are going to look for good stories. And if you put those stories in front of them and fill their appetite with those, they won't be as hungry for junk. And junk can look like lots of different things. Sure. But just because you find a story that is, how do I put this? That contains elements you don't...
that you don't agree with.
Yes.
Or that...
does not mean that this is a story that is going to hurt your child. I will give an example. Jane Eyre is one of my favorite stories. It is not an incredibly...
moralistic
pretty
tale.
Yes, moralistic. Oh dear. It's not pretty.
Right.
But the heart of the story is this idea of duty over desire. And Jane's choice to live out truth, to live purely in spite of everything, is rewarded in the end. And that whole beautiful picture is what spoke to my heart. It still speaks to my heart. Even though that is not something that I ever want to completely emulate. Right. As a child, I didn't need to be explained to why what she was planning to do was wrong. That was unnecessary. What I needed was the story of a girl who did the right thing. And it's a beautiful story. It's incredibly powerful. So I think finding those stories that are rich and deep and the whole chicken, rather than just little bits and pieces of the broth.
But teaching your children to be able to eat the meat and spit out the bones.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's okay to introduce them to things that may or may not be completely something that we always agree with in whole, but that is going a direction that would speak to their heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kaylynn, thank you so much for taking time to sit down in this way. I know sitting down with a microphone in front of you is daunting.
It's been a journey.
And you probably won't hear most of this, those that are listening to this, by the time we finish editing it all. But it has been fun, and I appreciate you taking time to share.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
For Gleaning and Gathering. God bless.